So I want to welcome everybody back from this summer. I hope you guys had a nice summer, even with all the smoke. There's a couple little housekeeping things that I need to do before we introduce our guest speaker. And the first one is at the beginning of every season, I'm supposed to read this out loud and then have it posted where you can see it every month. So just bear with me, I'm going to rattle it through. It's the Calgary Neuropathy Association disclaimer with the Northmount Baptist Church. So the board of the Calgary Neuropathy Association support group does not endorse or recommend any particular treatment, therapy, or practitioner. Practitioners and treatments mentioned are for information only. Any treatment, tests, or remedies mentioned may be tried at your own risk, but preferably after consultation with your healthcare provider. Views and opinions expressed during support group meetings or conversations with members of the CNA given verbally are not necessarily those of the CNA, its members, or the board. The accuracy of any information given is not guaranteed. Let it be known the CNA does not carry or maintain personal injury, health, medical, or disability insurance for any person being on the property of or entering the premises of the Northmount Baptist Church, including but not limited to members and guests, release and discharges the CNA, the board, members, guests from all and any claims, demands or actions based on negligence, error, and omissions, and to hold harmless the CNA, the board, members, and guests for any injury that may occur while attending a CNA support group meeting and or while on the premises of the Northmount Baptist Church property. There, done for the year. We don't have to say that again. We do have to pay for insurance, but to be in this building. And very fortunately, they've allowed us to be a rider on their insurance here, which $220 versus about $1,200 were the quotes I got otherwise. So we are so thankful to be in this location. A couple things for anybody that's new or has forgotten over the 3 months, but just out the doors, down the stairs, or where the washrooms are. If mobility is an issue, there's an elevator right there too, and it takes you right down, which is nice and handy. I just wanted to update you on a few little things that have happened over the summer. Margot here organized 4 coffee events, and they were actually quite well attended. There was like 5 to 8 people each time, and that's how we met Karen Pollock, who was at the door already helping. She also came out to the Pride Parade with us. Some of the things that we've done this summer is we had the barbecue, and I have some photos I want to show later, just it takes 2 minutes. And we were up, we were in the Disability Pride Parade, we were in the Pride Parade itself. Linda and I were just up in Edmonton last weekend at the Nerd Run, which is neurosciences, education, research, and discovery. And we reconnected with Dr. Zakotny. If a few of you guys would remember him. Did anybody see him as a doctor? You did too? It was a treat to see him.
Where did you see him?
Up in Edmonton.
Oh,
at this Nerd Run.
Yeah.
Yeah. And up there we've made some really key connections with their communication department. So anytime there's a press release of new research, we're hoping that will be included, where they can get the perspective of a person living with neuropathy and what does the research mean to us. So we did that for years until Dr. Zakotny left, and we haven't had that connection anymore. So we're really hoping that that will be reinstated. I also had a new lady from Edmonton that got hold of me. She has a type of really rare neuropathy to taking an antibiotic. They're called fluoroquinolones. Cipro is a very common one. And she has developed neuropathy, and she actually showed up at the Nerd Run just to meet Linda and I, and she's looking at taking on, starting a group, an extension of our group up in Edmonton. Yeah, Dr. Zakotny was really asking for this, and so just with the people we met, we're hoping over the next year that that will become a reality. Next month, we're going to try something new. We're going to have a webinar so that our meetings can be watched, I think, across Canada. Yep. So we're going to try to figure that out too. I'll know more about that Thursday evening. I think that's it for right now. So, I'm excited about our guest speaker today. I was at a function through a neuroplasticity meetup group, and I heard Michal speak at that, and I just went, oh, I've got to talk to her. It would just be such good information for our group. So I'm just going to go right into the bio. So Michal is a nutritional consultant working with groups and individuals looking to improve their general well-being with a special emphasis on naturally and holistically healing the metabolic, systemic, and the digestive damage associated with our modern lifestyle and our conventional dietary recommendations. She has studied health and nutrition extensively through multiple programs, including the Institute of Functional Medicine, the University of Stanford, and the Institute of Integrative Nutrition. Michal is a speaker, facilitator, and leader of large and smaller groups looking to improve their wellness and optimize their digestion. When not counseling others or trying to keep up to date with the most current health and wellness research, Michal is an avid yogi and aspiring amateur cook, testing her newest food creations on brave volunteers. That said, I asked her for some recipes, and so she gave me 4. I've printed them off, they're at the back. And I also did a sample of a couple of the recipes. So after she has her talk and we take a break and that, I do hope that you guys will all try something that I made last night. It's actually really good. I stayed up eating most of it. So I had to make sure I put enough in the container so that because it really was good. Did you like it? Mm-hmm. Yeah. And just before I say come on up, I forgot to do this, and I need to. This is absolutely beautiful. It's been handmade, and it's heavy, and it's got the 2 sides. It's a cutting board that Margot's husband, Jer, made, and they've donated it to our organization to use it as a fundraiser. So I just, she brought it in so we could show you and talk about it, and then we'll let you know what we've decided on how we're going to use it best to support our group. But thank you so much for bringing this in. You're welcome.
Leave it right there.
I'm going to move it so Michal can walk around a bit.
Good.
So that all said, I would now like to introduce Michal. Thank you for coming today.
Thank you, Sylvia.
Thank you so much for having me. I'm quite honored to be the first of the season, so I'm hoping I can live up to expectations for a great year to come for everybody. Can everybody hear me okay?
Yeah.
All right, just to make sure. And I'm going to have some stuff up on the slides so you can take notes. Most of what I talk about will be up there if you did want to take some notes and write a little bit. So who am I? Sylvia, thank you for the wonderful introduction. I don't think I need to introduce myself any further. Let's get into what we're going to talk about a little bit today. So the topic of our discussion is feeding the mind, nutrition, and the brain. And we're going to get into a couple of things. What we eat the most and why we shouldn't, right? Facts, the good, the bad, and the ugly, because there are all 3. Why you might not, or why you probably don't need to eat breakfast, right? It doesn't have to be the most important meal of the day. How to keep your neuronal membranes healthy. Ketogenic and low carbohydrate, high fat diets and their impact on brain function. We're going to be looking at the best nutrients to eat for optimal brain function. So we're going to get in, that's the part that everybody likes the most. And what you can do to protect your brain against neurodegenerative diseases, should you eat probiotics and prebiotics, and then we're going to get into the details of brain food. So we've got a lot to cover, and I'm hoping not to overwhelm. I think it's best if we leave questions till the end, Sylvia?
It's up to you, whatever.
All right, unless you have a burning question or you need something clarified, like right now.
I'm just wondering if you have any handouts or if we should be making notes.
I didn't make any handouts. I'm happy to email if anybody wanted.
You could send it to me.
To email Sylvia the presentation, and then I can send that to everybody because that'll give you a nice summary of everything that we covered. Does that Would that work for everyone?
That would be great.
Okay,
Yeah.
fantastic. So you'll get the presentation exactly like it is here, which is wonderful. So, and I'm going to ask a question. What do we think that the most damaging food that we're eating on a daily basis is? The most damaging food for our brain? Does
Sugar.
anybody have any idea?
Sugar.
You're right. And it's not just sugar, it's added sugar, right? Because sugar is something that is occurring in most foods. Anything that is a plant will contain some type of sugar. But it's the added sugars that are the biggest problem. Right, so the brain, all the brain cells require glucose to some degree to function. Most of the cells in our body use glucose to function. But of all the energy that we consume, it's important to understand that our brain uses 20% of the energy that we eat every single day. And that's big because the brain is not 20% of our body. The brain is probably, from a mass perspective, about 5%, but it uses about 20% of the energy. And the majority of this energy that in our modern daily diets is derived from sugar. So, what is excess sugar consumption? So everything, I always say the poison is in the dose, right? It always depends on how much. And the problem right now is this excessive sugar consumption. And excessive sugar consumption will lead to overeating. It will lead to poor memory. It will lead to learning disorders. And learning disorders, not just the stuff we think of in little kids, but in adults, it leads to memory problems, and it leads to, which I said, poor memory function, but also depleting memory problems, and it leads to depression. It can lead to mood disorders. And right now, the US Department of Agriculture, which is probably the best place to go for this type of research, estimates that on average, every single person is eating 156 pounds of sugar a year, on average. That's a lot. That's if you're looking at 5 grocery shelves with 30 bags of sugar on each shelf, 31-pound bags, or 20 or 15, probably about 17 altogether, 17 1-kilogram bags of sugar on. That's a whole bunch of sugar. And for some of us who don't eat a lot of sugar, like me, I've reduced my sugar consumption, that means that somebody else is eating way more to create the average of 156, right? It's a lot. What does that work out to? And this is added sugar. This isn't sugar that's naturally occurring in the plants that you're eating. This is sugar that's being added to your diet. And what does that work out to? It works out to about 27 teaspoons a day on average for each of us, added sugar. That's a crazy amount. And the reason that it's so insane is that all processed foods, all processed and manufactured foods right now have some type of added sugar. And not just sugar that we think of as sweet, but foods that turn to sugar in our bloodstream really fast. So that it kind of translates to white flour as well, but it's basically processed foods, which is quite crazy. So again, the emphasis here is on added, right? A diet that's based on lots of fruits and lots of, well, not so much fruits, but lots of vegetables and lots of plants and some fruits is a really healthy diet. We're talking about the stuff that's added in. All right. So why is sugar so bad? And why is sugar so bad for the brain? So now I'm going to be getting a little bit scientific. So if anybody needs extra explanation, just put your hand up. But one of the most important things is we have a compound in our brain called brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And brain-derived neurotrophic factor is very important for our functioning. Why? It helps us to make memories and to retain memories. It's unbelievably important for that. So when it comes to dementia and Alzheimer's diseases, and so the diseases are related to memory, brain-derived neurotrophic factor is important, and we want to keep it higher. Unfortunately, as our blood sugar goes up, our production of brain-derived neurotrophic factor goes down. And what researchers found is that people who have dysregulated blood sugar, so that's people in our generations who have pre-diabetes or diabetes, have much lower amounts of brain-derived neurotrophic factor. And sadly, these are the people who are often the most predisposed to the conditions that are the dementia and Alzheimer's type-related conditions. So brain-derived neurotrophic factor is very important. And we need to understand that when it comes to insulin resistance, the more sugar we have, the less brain-derived neurotrophic factor we have, the more it drives our cells not to listen to the call of insulin anymore. So it drives insulin, so low brain-derived neurotrophic factor drives insulin resistance, which then will cause diabetes, pre-diabetes and type 2 diabetes. But the insulin resistance will then reduce the brain-derived neurotrophic factor even more. So can you see that this gets us into a vicious cycle that is unpleasant? And this all stems from excessive sugar consumption, from our blood sugar going up and down. Something else that they've noticed that sugar does is, has anybody heard of a brain hormone or called oxytocin? So oxytocin is one of our feel-good hormones. It's the thing that gets released when you get a hug, right? That makes you feel good. Who here has ever been in love? Right? I think we've all been in love once or twice, right? And what happens to our appetite when we're in love? Like right at the beginning, the beginning, that honeymoon part of your relationship, your appetite goes all the way down, because oxytocin actually suppresses our appetite and our desire for carbohydrates. Although they tell us that on Valentine's Day we should be giving and eating chocolates and candy, in those first stages of love, that's probably the last thing that you feel like. One of the things that sugar and added sugar in your diet actually does is it suppresses the production of oxytocin. And oxytocin is they use this fancy word, anorexigenic. It's an anorexigenic compound. It turns off our hunger. So as we're eating sugar, what's happening is our oxytocin is suppressed and our hunger is increased. So we end up wanting to eat more and craving more sugar. And then it starts to drive that same vicious process all over again. Does that make sense? Does that make sense to people? So those are two really important ways that sugar can be unbelievably harmful to us. So insulin, I just want to go through insulin with you guys a little bit, because I know although we're talking about the brain, what happens in the rest of the body is really important for the brain. And the pancreas is where we produce a hormone called insulin. And insulin isn't a terrible thing, but too much insulin isn't good for you. Insulin is there to take energy from our cells and take energy from our bloodstream, and put it into our cells. Now what happens is when we have too much sugar in our bloodstream, the body gets a little nuts and shoots out a whole bunch of insulin because it has to move that sugar out of our cells really fast. And this is so all that insulin to move the sugar out, if it happens over and over and over again, when you hear a barking dog in the background or somebody screaming and you don't want to listen to them anymore, right? We just kind of down-regulate the sound. The cells down-regulate the call of insulin. And again, that will start to drive the two factors that I spoke about a little earlier. Now, what they've actually found, and studies have found, this is studies done at the Mayo Clinic, is that people who consume large amounts of carbohydrate, large amounts of sugar in their diet, actually have an 89% increased risk of getting a neurodegenerative disease. So this is really important, that these added sugars in our diet have an impact. Those who tended to eat less carbohydrates and more fat had a 44% increased resistance to these neurodegenerative factors. So really, really important to consider. Remember that too much insulin in the body will increase your risk for dementia and it will double your risk for Alzheimer's. Most people who eventually get Alzheimer's disease do have dysregulated blood sugars, do have dysregulated insulin. So there is a definite connection. It's unbelievably important. Now, you say, okay, so I'm not eating that many carbohydrates and everything that I'm eating is healthy and it's whole grain. What about those? And there is something really interesting called the Glycemic Index. Has anybody heard of the Glycemic Index? All right, do you guys know? So I'll just go through it very briefly. The Glycemic Index basically tells us on a scale of 1 to 100 how much 100 grams of a specific food is going to raise your blood sugar, how much, how fast, and for how long, right? So the higher the number, the higher the food will raise your blood sugar, and the longer it's going to keep it up there. Make sense? So, table sugar, just as an example, has a rating on the scale of between 55 and 60. Does anybody have any idea what white bread is? 71. Which is crazy, right? White bread raises your blood sugar more than sugar. Very important to understand. This is the scarier one. Do you have any idea what the glycemic index of whole grain bread is?
Please tell me it's lower.
We would think that it is, but it's actually between 73 and 78. So whole grains raise your blood sugar quicker for longer than processed grains, these complex carbohydrates. Why? Because they're more difficult for the body to break down. They're more difficult for us to store. So it takes a lot more work, a lot more insulin. Insulin is the hormone that's doing the work to shuttle these things around. Does that make sense to people? So it's really, really clear that insulin is really important, and too much insulin is bad. Cells being resistant to insulin, cells not listening to insulin, not good for the health of our brain. So really, really important to get into that. So there we go. Glycemic index. Your blood sugar is elevated, right? Whole grain bread is dramatically higher than table sugar. We saw that. Table sugar, 55 to 60. Just so that you know, a banana, which is a relatively high sugar fruit, a banana sits at around 45, and a Snickers bar, so a chocolate bar, which we would think would be the highest, right, sits between 50 and 55. So just an example of where things sit, and it's not always what we think, right, when it comes to raising our blood sugar. So you're going to say, okay, but sometimes I just need a cookie, right? Sometimes I just need some carbohydrates. Sometimes it's my absolute favorite apple pie. What do we do? What can we do to mitigate in some way the effects of these spikes in our blood sugar? And there's a couple of things that tend to work really well. Did anybody ever hear the old wives' tale of have a shot of apple cider vinegar or have a shot of vinegar before your meal? It's better for your digestion. Right? Sounds like an old wives' tale, but it actually works. And not only does it work, but it helps to regulate the insulin response to sugars, which is fantastic. Cinnamon also has been clinically proven to lower our blood sugar. So if you're struggling with blood sugars starting to elevate, and we'll know this from our blood test when you go and get your physicals, incorporating cinnamon into your diet on a daily basis can really help us to regulate. Movement is fantastic. Everybody's heard that exercise is great, right? And we all think that going to the gym for an hour a day is fine. That's not what movement is about. Going for a walk. Whoever, I'm sure we've all heard about it. Oh, you had a heavy meal and all you want to do is lie on the couch. Go for a walk it off, right? We've all done it. We've all at least heard that. I know my grandparents used to tell me that all the time. After a meal, go for a walk, get outside. It's like, no, we want to sit on the couch. No, get outside. Right? And why? Because what it helps us to do is shuttle that glucose, shuttle that insulin through our cells a whole lot more. So moving around, so I'm not talking about heavy exercise, I'm talking about moving around a lot at a slow pace. Going for a walk after a meal, again, can really help us to start to lower that blood sugar, that glucose response. And then the last one, this is the scientific one, is what we call carbohydrate timing. And what this is when you eat your carbohydrates in your meal, is going to make a difference to how your blood sugar responds. Who knew, right? But if you think about it, when your stomach is empty, if the first thing that you ate, now this is funny if you think about what restaurants do, but if the first thing that you ate was a piece of multigrain bread on an empty tummy, what's going to happen? The sugar's going to go right in, it's going to get flooded into your bloodstream, your blood sugar's going to skyrocket, all the BDNF, the oxytocin stuff, you're actually going to get hungrier, and you're going to end up eating more in your meal, but your blood sugar, which is why they serve you bread at a restaurant first, just by the way, but now you know the tricks. But that skyrocketing blood sugar, again, not good. We want to keep that insulin in that nice, good, stable range. So what do? Well, choose to have things other than your carbohydrates first in your meal. So that would mean maybe a couple of bites of your chicken or your steak or your fish. Maybe some salad with some salad dressing. Maybe some nuts. And choose to have your carbohydrates later. Dessert is better than the bread basket at the beginning of the meal. Neither one are perfect, but sometimes we need a dessert, and that's okay. We all live lives. And so having your dessert after your meal is actually better for your blood sugar response than having the bread basket before, and then go for a walk. Okay. So now we're going to talk about the next thing, because I think I've beaten the sugar bush for a while, and let's talk about the role of fats in our diet and the role of fats in our brain. And I know this might seem very generic to all of you, but I want you to get an understanding of how the body works and how digestion and food work, so that we can really talk in a little while about the impact that has on our brain and our brain function, and keeping our brains as strong and as flexible and as disease-free as possible. So fats, although fats were vilified for many years, and I think all of us here have lived through the 80s and the 90s, where fat was the devil and such things, but it isn't. Fats are actually unbelievably important. They're good for our metabolism. Our metabolism functions better with fat. You will gain less weight when you eat fat. It works for our cell signaling. What does that mean? It means our cells speak to each other, and our cells speak to our brains and our bodies. And the way that our bodies respond is actually very much dependent on the fats that we eat and the types of fats that we eat. But some certain body tissues are really reliant on fats in order to survive. The brain being one of them, and we'll talk about that. We'll talk about that in a little bit. It's important for immunity, right? Our immune system cannot function without some healthy fats. It's hormone production. All of your reproductive hormones, every single one of them, is actually reliant on fat in order to be produced. And many of your other hormones, so I know we all think of hormones only as our reproductive hormones, but hormones are the things that our cells use to talk to each other. And they're all important and they're all reliant on fat in order to function. And then many of our nutrients, this is really important. We cannot absorb food from our small intestine into our bloodstream without fats. The most important ones of which are vitamin A, vitamin D, and vitamin E. Those are what we call our fat-soluble vitamins. So you could be eating, or you could be taking all of the vitamin D drops in the world. If you're not eating any fat, you're not getting that into your body. And vitamin D is vital, again, for the functioning of the brain. So fats are really important from that perspective. So why are fats important, right? There's strong evidence, really strong evidence, that fats are cardiovascular protective. They will protect you from future cardiovascular events. They're not necessarily going to protect you against heart failure, but they will protect you against cardiovascular events. They improve your body composition. If you eat fat, you will burn fat. You will look better, right? I always say you'll look good naked if you eat more fat. You'll look good, right? Fats also make us happy. Okay? If you think about putting butter on your veggies, it always makes us smile, right? Boring veggies just with salt, man. Veggies with some butter, everybody smiles. Veggies with some bacon, people often smile a little bigger. There's other mechanisms for that, but fat does make us happy, right? There's also some average evidence. So the evidence is relatively clear that they can prevent cancer, that fats preserve memory, that they're good for your eye health, right? So they keep our vision. They reduce the incidence of aggressive behavior. They calm us down, right? Maybe just eat a little bit of butter, and then we wouldn't have as many aggressive outbursts. And they're also very, very important in the ADD, ADHD spectrum of diseases. Again, so brain-centered conditions where fats are unbelievably important. So remember that we are fatheads, all of us, we're fatheads, literally. Our bodies are made of fat. Our brain, right, remember that our brain is predominantly fat, right? Our brain is made up of fat. We have a fatty sheet that insulates our nervous system, and every single cell membrane is made up of something called phospholipids. Lipid, anytime you hear the word lipid, that means fat. So every membrane of your cell. So if you don't have enough fat in your body, your cells, just every single little cell is eventually going to start to break down. So it's really important. And when I spoke about cell signaling a little earlier, just to explain, blood vessel constriction and dilation, right, is fats can actually govern that. So when we're talking about high blood pressure, sometimes certain types of fats can actually help to regulate the high blood pressure. Inflammation, fats can be anti-inflammatory. Clotting, really important when we're looking at stroke prevention, that certain fats can help the viscosity of our blood and prevent blood from clotting when it shouldn't. Okay, because we need our blood to clot, obviously. Pain, again, anti-inflammatory. Fats are anti-inflammatory. They can help us a lot with pain. And they help us with our breathing, with our airway constriction. They help to lubricate the vessels, as they do with our blood vessels, lubricate the vessels and the areolae in those are the small little things that expand and contract in our lungs. So is everybody clear that fats are unbelievably important? And I'm not talking about all fats, but we will get into what are good fats and what are not good fats, but fats are unbelievably important, right? So the most important fats that I want to talk about first and foremost are our omega-3s. And why I say they're the most important isn't because they're the most beneficial or the least beneficial, but they're what we call essential fats. And whenever you hear in the nutrition world the words essential, what that means is that the body cannot make it. We have to consume it. We have to take it in from the outside. And omega-3s we have to consume. So they're unbelievably important for that. Now, there's many types, but there's three that are really important, and I always really just do the names really badly, so I'm not going to say them, you can read them, and I'll send you the presentation. But we have ALA, we have DHA, and we have EPA, right? ALA is plant-based, and EPA and DHA are animal-based. Now, the body requires EPA and DHA. Those are the essential omega-3s that it needs. It can make EPA and DHA from ALA. So if you've heard that flax seeds or chia seeds, who's heard flax and chia are good sources of omega-3s? Anyone? Okay. So what they are good sources of ALA, right? Fish, fatty fish like salmon, you've all heard about that. Eat your salmon to get your omega-3s. Salmon have the EPA and the DHA. So what happens is we need a whole bunch of ALA, a whole bunch of flaxseed or a whole bunch of chia seed to produce a little bit of EPA and DHA. It's much easier to get it from high quality fish. So it's a laborious process, it's an inefficient process. The body needs a whole lot of ALA to make a little bit of EPA and DHA. And now we're going to cycle back a little bit. Guess what slows down the production? Guess what slows down the conversion of ALA into EPA and DHA? Sugar, yeah. Diets that are high in carbohydrates and dysregulated blood sugar slow down our ALA conversion rates. So the standard American diet, which happens to be very, very low in omega-3s and very, very high in sugars and processed carbohydrates, is not good for our brain health. Omega-3s have been shown to support the brain in numerous and wonderful and phenomenal ways. And the way that we are eating in our society is destroying our brains, sadly. Okay, sorry, now I'm getting on a rant. So let's get on. Then we have monounsaturated fats. Everybody knows about monounsaturated fats. Those are the ones that come in avocado oil and that come in olive oil, some nuts and some seeds. They're really, really good for the heart. Okay, monounsaturated fats, they're good for many things, but really good for the heart. They're the ones that all the clinical trials have been shown that lower the LDL, the bad cholesterol, and they can sometimes raise the LDL, the good cholesterol. So you've all heard olive oil is good for your heart. This is one. The next one we have is saturated fats. Now, saturated fats, this is where we get a little bit controversial because we've been told for years that saturated fats are heart disease, like it's heart disease in a jar, right? It's waiting to happen. Just don't eat your butter because it's a saturated fat and it's going to kill you. Not really true. Saturated fats are the fundamental building blocks for brain cells. There are two types of fats that your brain needs. One of them is saturated fats. Believe it or not, one of the first places that we ever get our saturated fats is in breast milk. Right? Babies live on saturated fat, which comes from breast milk. So, and we don't lose the ability to use it as we grow up. We just have been told not to eat it quite as much. Saturated fat actually supports HDL. It supports the good cholesterol. And last but not least, where do we get it? We get it in saturated fats are things that are solid at room temperature. So I'll tell you how to differentiate between the three, because most fats have a little bit of everything in. I do want to emphasize that the reason that we thought originally that saturated fats were bad for us was a theory that was surmised, I guess, in the 1960s and the 1970s, and that's a whole other talk about how the food pyramid and the food guide came into being. But basically, there was a theory that saturated fat caused heart disease. That theory has been proven false. The science has proven it incorrect. Sadly, policies and food guides and those types of things have not yet caught up. So understand that the consumption of good quality saturated fat is not going to affect your health in a negative way. It's actually going to affect your health in a positive way. Now again, if you look at our standard, the standard North American diet, we have these man-made saturated fats, right? We have things like margarines and weird hydrogenated oils and intersterified and trans fats and strange things. Those types of saturated fats are killers. Those will hurt you. But naturally occurring saturated fats that come in animals that have been well raised and that come from well-sourced tropical oils. So if you're looking at an organic or a virgin coconut oil or a virgin palm oil, fantastic. Okay? It's the man-made, the manufactured, the processed saturated fats that aren't. So I need to always stop and try and clear that up for people because there's such a disconnect and a misunderstanding of which fats are good and which fats are not. And too little saturated fat in your diet does affect your brain health because every single cell in your brain requires saturated fat to maintain its integrity. The other thing, controversial I know, but the other type of fat, so to speak, that the brain requires to function is cholesterol. Okay? Really important to understand. So again, we've been told that cholesterol is the killer, but it isn't. Again, it's a lot more nuanced, and I'm not telling you to go and find cholesterol pills, which I don't think they make. But cholesterol is unbelievably important for the brain. Not only is it important for the cells of the brain, but it acts as an anti-inflammatory, an antioxidant to the brain. It helps to clean up, and we'll talk in a little bit about how brain cells can start to misfire, or how they can get all out of whack, or how they can produce byproducts, because every time we use energy, in our cars, when we use energy, we have a byproduct, exhaust fumes. When our cells use energy, they have a byproduct too. And cholesterol actually helps to clean that up, which is unbelievably important. There is not a hormone in your body that does not require cholesterol in order to be made. That's estrogen, that's progesterone, that's testosterone, that's all your reproductive hormones for sure. Vitamin D needs cholesterol in order to be synthesized. So remember how I spoke a little bit earlier about how you can take all the vitamin D pills in the world, but if they're not with fat, they can't be absorbed from our digestive tract into our bloodstream. And it's the same from our bloodstream. In order for our cells to use them, which means you could be lying in the sun for hours and hours and baking away and getting all your vitamin D that way. But if you do not have sufficient cholesterol in your body, you are not able to take that vitamin D and use it for your brain and for your body. Does that make sense to people? It's really important to understand that how necessary cholesterol is. And it's interesting because has anybody here been on cholesterol lowering medications?
What kind of medication?
Cholesterol lowering. So has anybody ever read the side effect panel?
Yeah, scary.
Okay, so what are the side effects of cholesterol lowering medication? Depression, dementia, Alzheimer's, lowered sexual function, muscle dysfunction. These are all things that cholesterol and or vitamin D are really important for. So yes, your cholesterol is low, that's great, but you'll get dementia, right? And
Depression.
and depression, right? And there's no guarantee that the cholesterol lowering medication is going to prevent any type of cardiovascular incident. Again, another conversation. I don't want to get into that too much. I want to talk about the brain. So remember, now another thing to look at, remember how I said the brain is about 5% of our mass. 25% of our cholesterol is found in our brains. Our brains love cholesterol, okay? They need it. And that's why, again, the cholesterol-lowering meds have such a profound impact on the brain. Brain cells require them. So, when we're talking about fat, what is important? Quality, okay? Quality is really, really vital. I'm not saying go out and eat as much of any type of fat as you want. We want the fat to be as naturally occurring as possible. So, as an example, if we're comparing butter with margarine, sorry, I have a weird accent. Which one do you think which one is more natural, butter or margarine?
Butter.
Butter. So if we want to keep our fats as natural as possible, which one is better for us?
Butter.
Butter. Butter has more saturated fat. Butter has more cholesterol. I know this. Don't be scared. Margarine has more man-made fats and sometimes trans fats, and because they've taken trans fats out of our food supply, food manufacturers have had to find another way to make oil solid, so they call them interesterified fats, which are just as bad as trans fats. They're just legal. Okay? So if you read the ingredients of anything and it says hydrogenated or partially hydrogenated or modified in any way whatsoever on that label, avoid it like the plague. Those are not good for you. Okay? So the quality of your fat is really important. How natural, how naturally occurring is this fat? I've given you some lists here. You know, we know these things that happen. We'll talk a little bit more about eggs later, nuts and seeds, all types of foods that are, I think, kind of yummy. Anyway, so we're good. Avoid the artificially created fats. You want to keep it simple, okay? You don't want to, there's no need to overcomplicate things. Your diet doesn't have to be, you don't need a degree, you don't need a PhD in order to eat well. You just need to keep it simple, keep it as natural as possible. One of the things, that I do always recommend is to supplement with an algae or a fish oil. We do not get enough omega-3s in our diet. We get way too many omega-6s as compared to omega-3s. Needless to say, we need more omega-3s. You cannot eat enough fatty, wild-caught salmon to get enough omega-3s right now. So supplementing with a fish oil, you want to get, you want to get around 3 to 6 grams. So that's 3,000 to 6,000 milligrams of fish oil into your diet on a daily basis. This is what is supportive of brain health. If you're doing it with algae oil, which is a little harder to get hold of, it's a little pricey, you need a little less, 1 to 2 grams. Okay?
What is algae oil?
Algae oil is an oil like a fish oil, but it's been derived from sea plankton, from algae.
Okay.
So some people who struggle with eating fish or who don't want to eat animal products, but we still want them to get those omega-3s.
Is that healthy?
Very.
Really?
Yes.
I thought algae was bad.
Well, it can be bad, but it's certain types of algae.
Okay.
And this has been, I'm not telling you to go out to the lake and eat algae. Because that would just be gross.
Not the surface.
Yeah, unless you want to sprinkle it on your salad, right? But an algae oil, a well-formulated algae oil, and you can get that at your health food store, will be really, really good for you.
Never heard of it.
Yeah, and it's not something that, we'll hear about the fish oils more because they're easier to produce, they're a little more cost-effective. But if you don't like to eat animal products, then that's also a way to go. All right, so now we're going to talk about some things that are a little different to food, and we're going to talk about some strategies to support the brain and how they support the brain. So we've spoken a little bit about insulin and cortisol. Does anybody know what cortisol is? Cortisol is another one of our hormones. It's often known as our stress hormone. It's the hormone that when we have too much of it, when we're stressed, we have too much of it. And as with everything in our body, the balance is really important. One of the wonderful things that cortisol does, in the morning when you wake up, that's cortisol. Cortisol gets you up. Cortisol gives you that little kick in the rear end to get you going and get you doing things. So in the morning, first thing in the morning, our cortisol is really high, right? That's what's woken us up. And insulin, remember I told you earlier, insulin is that hormone that takes energy from our bloodstream into our cells. So our cells are very, very insulin sensitive in the morning. Why? Because cortisol also releases energy, releases glucose, releases sugar generally from our storage. We have some storage for sugar in our muscles and in our liver. It releases that into our bloodstream because we're going to need energy right now. That's what cortisol is telling us. You need some energy right now. So our cells become really insulin sensitive so that they can take this energy and shuttle it around. Does that make sense to people? So what happens in the morning for most of us, and you're eating some whole grain cereal, maybe with some toast and some orange juice, and your cortisol is high, and your cells are very insulin sensitive. Can we imagine what's going on? Our blood sugar is going this way, and our BDNF is going this way. When we wake up in the morning, one of the wonderful things is that our BDNF, which is so good for our brains and for the development and for the strength of our brains, is nice and high.
What's BDNF?
BDNF is that hormone that I spoke of in the very beginning, that brain-derived neurotrophic factor. The one that's important for our memories, that supports the frontal cortex of our brains. So in the morning, cortisol high, insulin sensitive, BDNF low, we eat a high carbohydrate breakfast, and that's all just gone to pot, right? So what happens when we fast? What happens when we skip breakfast? Remember how I said in the beginning, we're going to talk about why breakfast might not be the most important meal of the day? And what happens when we skip breakfast? We actually keep all of these benefits for a little bit longer in the day. Also, when we don't eat, and we know this because sleep is really important because that's when we restore and repair our cells, right? So what happens, and sleep is probably one of the few times in our modern lives when we're not eating. Because we're all eating all the time, right? We're snacking here and eating there and putting something in our mouths all the time. And they've actually done studies that people who are awake for 14 hours a day are probably eating for 15 hours a day. Right? No, but really, we're eating all that, we might not think that we are, but we are. We're eating all the time. So by taking that time when we're sleeping and extending it a little bit, by not eating for a little bit longer, we can actually extend some of the benefits that happen when we sleep, which is the repairing and restoring. We call that, the fancy term is called autophagy, and that's also when your cells start to clean up, right? Whenever we use things, we know, like you use things at home and they get a little dirty and rusty, and sometimes we need to clean them up or do a servicing on them. And our cells are not able to do all of that when they're constantly trying to deal with an intake of food and with that sugar coming up and down all the time. So not eating can be very, very helpful. Number one, it'll keep our BDNF nice and high. Number two, it'll keep our cells cleaning each other up. And it's also what we call epigenetic. And what epigenetic means is that we were taught long ago that our genes are our destiny, right? But there's only certain genes that are predetermined. Your eye color is predetermined. Your hair color is predetermined. We can change that, but it's predetermined, right? Your height, for the most part, is predetermined, but there are other factors, your lifestyle and your dietary factors, that can impact almost everything else. So when people tell you that, especially when it comes to degenerative diseases of the brain, that they are, oh, I'm just going to get it, that you're predisposed to it because it's genetic, that's not true. You might be predisposed to it, but that doesn't mean you're going to get it. And it's your lifestyle factors, what you eat and how you live, that can change that. That can have a huge impact on that. So, and one of the things that can really impact our epigenetics, how our genes express themselves, is not eating for a little bit of time. Right? We need to eat. I'm not talking about not eating forever, but for a little bit of time. Now, a caveat, I need to just say, if you are diabetic and on any blood sugar regulating medication, please do not do this without talking to your doctor. All right? If you are on any medications at all, do not just stop your medications in the morning because Michal here told you that not eating is good for your brain, okay? So just be smart about it. This can even be good just in noticing how long you eat in between, how long it takes you to not eat in between meals. When I work with people, two of the things that we like to work on that work really well are, number one is not eating for 12 hours, which means from dinner till breakfast, nothing other than water passes your lips for 12 hours. Okay, so you might think that that's easy, but sometimes it's not. What that means is that if you're eating dinner at 5 or 6, and maybe you need to have a little snack at 7 or 8, you shouldn't be eating again. You shouldn't be having breakfast until 7 or 8. Or not having your little snack and then you can have breakfast at 6 in the morning. Another thing that we work on is not eating, is once you've had your meal, not having anything else other than water, again, for 5 hours. Right? So that would mean if you're eating breakfast at 7, at 6:30 or 7, that would mean eating lunch at probably 12:30 or 1, and that would mean eating dinner at 5:30 or 6, and then you can maybe have a tiny little snack or maybe a warm drink before you go to bed, and then 12 hours again. So those are just some strategies on how to put this into real life without being extreme. So I'm not saying don't eat. I'm just saying it's something to consider. Does that make sense to everyone? So the next thing we're going to talk about is the ketogenic diet. Has anybody heard about the ketogenic diet? Okay. So the ketogenic diet, it mimics starvation. It mimics not eating. So it tricks your body into thinking that it's not eating while you're still eating, which is quite fantastic. And how does the ketogenic diet work? So what happens is the body, the way that we developed, the way that we came into being was with multiple ways to fuel ourselves, because we needed to know as a species that if we couldn't get fuel from one thing, we could get fuel from another. Kind of like a car that can run on both diesel and gasoline, right? You never know, there could be a gas station that doesn't have diesel or a gas station that doesn't have gasoline, but if your car can run on both, you know that you're always safe. And the body is exactly the same way. It can run on two different types of fuels. It can run on glucose, and if you give it glucose is sugar. Glucose is what sugar or things that turn to sugar turn to in your bloodstream. So when I say things turn to sugar in your blood, they turn into something called glucose. Glucose is what your body uses as energy. It can use that, and when it's constantly getting glucose, because we're constantly giving it food that turns to sugar really fast, it really doesn't worry about using anything else, and that system gets a little rusty. But it does have another system, and that's a system where it uses something called free fatty acids or ketone bodies as fuel. Free fatty acids are exactly what they sound like. They're free, they're floating around in your bloodstream, and they're fats. They're fats that have been liberated from your fat cells by a process, fancy scientific name again, called lipolysis, and they're released into your bloodstream, and they can be used as energy for the body. There are certain organs in the body, or there are certain processes in the body that cannot use free fatty acids as a fuel source. So the liver, being the wonderful organ that it is, converts these free fatty acids into something called ketone bodies. And these ketone bodies can be used by all the cells in the body, the same ones that use free fatty acids, and by those that cannot. And by those that cannot, I'm talking about cells in the brain. And the brain cannot run on free fatty acids. It can run on glucose, and it can run very, very well on ketone bodies. Now,
When you're diabetic, isn't that dangerous to have ketones?
that's ketoacidosis,
Oh.
and that's a very, very, very different condition to general ketosis. All right? There are too many, again, remember how we spoke about balance? A good amount of ketones in the body is great for fuel. Too many ketones in the body, just as bad as too much glucose in the body.
Okay.
All right? But two very, very different conditions, and if you are not diabetic, having ketones running around in your bloodstream is perfectly fine. Okay? So, who's heard here that the brain has to run on sugar? That the brain needs sugar to survive? Has anybody heard that? So there are certain parts in the hippocampus, in the brain, and in the hypothalamus that actually are purely glucose driven. They cannot run on ketones, and they cannot run on fatty acids. So you're going to say, geez, Michal, okay, you're telling us that sugar's bad. But the body has ways of making sufficient glucose from amino acids, from proteins, to fuel those tiny little parts of the brain. So we don't have to be consuming the sugars in order to be fueling the parts in the hypothalamus and in the hippocampus in the brain with those little bits of sugar, and the rest of the brain can run quite perfectly on these ketone bodies. So there's a fancy diagram for anybody who wants to see on exactly how ketosis works and how the free fatty acids are liberated from our cells. They go into our liver. The liver then does a big transformation of them into 3 different types of ketone bodies, and these ketone bodies can be used as fuel. This process can only happen in the absence of glucose, in the absence of carbohydrate. So your body is really not producing ketones. It doesn't have to. If it's got all this sugar running around, it would way rather be using that. Well, it needs to use that. So it doesn't think about making ketones. It doesn't have to. Does that make sense to people? So we lower our carbohydrates, we start to use more free fatty acids, we start to make more ketones. So there's 3 specific types of ketones. There's beta-hydroxybutyrate, there's acetoacetate, and there's acetone. All right, beta-hydroxybutyrate and acetoacetate, if we don't use those, they are urinated out. And as acetone, we don't use that at all. It's usually breathed out. Acetone is a breath one. And then I said, and then the rest of the fuel, we can, if we do need glucose, we use it from amino acid breakdown, which is protein breakdown, which isn't muscle breakdown. It's some protein that you're eating. Okay, because we need to eat protein. Protein is essential, the same way as omega-3s are essential. All right, so you're going to say to me, okay, so for all this talk, that's nice, why and how are ketones protective of the brain? And the important thing here is energy. And this is where we're going to start tying everything together. Ketones are an alternate source of energy to the brain. And beta-hydroxybutyrate, which is the ketone body that we use the most in the brain for energy, is actually a way more efficient form of energy for the brain cells. Now, something important to understand is with neuropathy, with degenerative brain conditions, one of the driving factors for the condition is the brain cells not being able to get the amount of energy that they need in order to function. And beta-hydroxybutyrate is a much easier form, it's a much more efficient, form of energy for the brain to use than glucose when it comes to using oxygen and getting energy from that. Does this make sense? So we can get more energy to our cells with beta-hydroxybutyrate, to our brain cells specifically, than we can with glucose. And this is really important with degenerative brain diseases. It also, beta-hydroxybutyrate, increases the activity of something called glutathione peroxidase. And who's heard about free radicals? Right? And antioxidants, right? Have we heard about antioxidants? We all take antioxidants to get rid of free radicals. Remember a little bit earlier I said that whenever we use energy, we have a byproduct, we have an exhaust. And when we say what are free radicals are the exhaust product of energy production for the most part. When cells use oxygen, or when oxygen interacts with our cells, things, sometimes the cell gets, some molecules get broken down and broken into parts, and a free radical is usually something that's attached to an oxygen molecule that has a little free tail that's running around. It's not attached to anything else. It's the byproduct of a breakdown. And that little free tail that runs around through our bodies and through our brains and does a whole bunch of damage. You know, like a dog with its tail wagging, it's hitting everything and dropping everything all over the place. And antioxidants, what those do is they attach to that free tail and they stop it from doing damage and then allow the body to remove it and process it in its cleanup process called autophagy, which happens when we sleep or when we don't eat, right? Make sense? Okay, fantastic. So glutathione peroxidase is one of these antioxidants in the brain, and beta-hydroxybutyrate actually upregulates the production of this particular compound, which helps the brain to clean up some of the exhaust. Which again is good because the exhaust the oxidants, the free radicals, can block the energy, can block the cells from getting and using their energy. So again, really important when we're looking at preserving brain function, and especially when we're starting to lose brain function in some way, looking at maintaining us where we're at or getting the most that we can out of it. So unbelievably important. Now I've written a lot of stuff here and I didn't think we'd get a lot of time to go through it. So I did want to pass all of this information. So as I said, you guys will get these slides, so hopefully that will help. So we've said that beta-hydroxybutyrate, they're a more efficient source of energy, right? So better for your brain. They're neuroprotective. They act like a blueberry. Think of them as ketone bodies are the blueberries for the brain. Harmful reactive oxygen species, those are the free radicals. Another name for them is anti-glycation end products. And it's funny because the shortening for that is an age. We call them agers. And one of the things that free radicals do, or that agers do, or that reactive oxygen species do, is they age us. Those are the things that cause your skin to look old and for you to feel not as youthful. Okay, so ketone bodies also allow us to form more mitochondria. So mitochondria are the energy nuclei of cells. That's how we use energy. Now, the hippocampus and the frontal cortex of the brain are the two parts of the brain that are really important for memory and for thought processes. So any conditions dealing with memory or thought process, the hippocampus and the frontal cortex are involved. And forming more mitochondria, so more energy producing parts of the cell in this part of the brain is unbelievably important for these conditions. And ketone bodies support that. So again, not only are they more efficient at using energy, they actually create more pathways for us to use more energy. And the brain cells being able to use energy is unbelievably important for a well-functioning brain. They're also what we call GABAergic. So GABA is another one of our brain chemicals. GABA is one of those things that calms us down and makes us feel good. And GABA works with something called glutamate, and they work in a a very delicate balance, and too much glutamate can actually be excitotoxic, it can be neurotoxic. And where glutamate actually helps us produce GABA, too much glutamate suppresses GABA and is unbelievably excitatory to the brain. And ketone bodies help to calm that down. They really help to balance the glutamate and get it down. That's in a lot more detail there. You'll get that in the slide. And last but not least, back to this BDNF thing, right? Ketones actually trigger brain-derived neurotrophic factor. So remember when I said that brain-derived neurotrophic factor is down when we're eating carbohydrates? It actually is upregulated when we have ketone bodies. Again, really important for the frontal lobe and the hippocampus of the brain. It allows us. Has anybody heard that when your brain cells die, they die? Like they can't regenerate?
Yeah.
And that's not 100%. That's not 100% true. There is an ability to regenerate brain cells with sufficient energy and with sufficient energy nuclei, mitochondria in the cell. This is how it's done through ketone bodies and BDNF in the brain. All right. So basically, what happens when the brain cells get overexcited? When the brain cells get overexcited, and then they can explode, or bad things can happen. They overtransmit signaling. We start to lose the ability to hear the signaling properly. We become more resistant to the signaling. It's not a good thing, right? Overexcited neurons will eventually die. Not good. Ketones dampen that enthusiasm, right? They stop neurons from getting overexcited. So we want brain cells to get excited, but we don't want them to get overexcited because then they just implode on themselves. This is where ketones and the ketogenic diet is unbelievably important. All right, enough of that. We can take a deep breath. All the heavy science stuff is over. Now we're going to get on to some fun stuff. So, probiotics, and you're going to think, what are you talking about? How are probiotics going to help my brain, right? But they do. They promote the development and the growth of neurons. They stimulate memory and learning. Probiotics are really important for mood and mood regulation, and they shift our digestive patterns. And anybody who's struggled with anxiety knows that, if you're anxious, you're often feeling it in your gut. So the gut and the brain are really, really connected that way. And remember how I spoke about epigenetics? One of the biggest influences of our epigenetics, of how our genes are going to express themselves, is through probiotics. The gut and the brain are intricately connected. They're connected by their own pathway. There's a nerve called the vagus nerve that connects the gut and the brain. And the brain does not only govern the gut governs the brain. It is a dual pathway. Important to understand because it's not just your stomach that does it. We have about 3 to 5 pounds of bacteria that live predominantly in our large intestines. And it's these that communicate with our brain and govern all of those factors. And looking after these bacteria who have evolved with us, they cannot live without us, and we cannot live without them. And taking care of them is unbelievably important when we're looking at supporting and taking care of our brain health. And I just wanted to touch on that very briefly. We know for sure that taking probiotics and probiotic supplementation and looking after your gut bacteria will support memory and learning. It will support brain health. It will support mood regulation. How? We're not quite sure yet. We know that they do, which means that I can't tell you exactly what pill to take to make this better or that better. But I do know that supporting the health of our gut and supporting the health of those bacteria is unbelievably important when supporting the health of the brain. How do we do that? We take high-quality probiotic supplements, and we include some fermented foods in our diet. Fermented foods are naturally fermented foods, not the stuff you get on the shelf in the grocery store. We need to be refrigerated. You can buy them, or you can make them. You know, your great-great-grandmother, the sauerkraut that she used to make, that she never used to boil, that stuff. Some naturally made yogurt. So your probiotics aren't just good to make you go number 2, right? They're good for your brain. They're good for your brain too. Okay. So let's talk a little bit about brain foods, and then we'll open it up to some questions. So I'm sure you're probably wondering, okay, so now I've got all this information. That's great. What do I eat? Okay, you've told me to take away my whole grain bread. What do I eat? So I'm just going to go through a couple of foods, well, quite a few, and why they're good for us very, very briefly. Avocados, fantastic. They're a source of monounsaturated fats, good for the heart, good for the cell signaling. They have fiber in them. They have lots of vitamin D. They have vitamin K in them as well. Vitamin K, again, one of those really important ones for functioning of the brain. And they taste delicious, right? Who doesn't like guacamole? All right, if you don't tell me.
No.
Blueberries, we know, as much as we know that ketones act like blueberries on the brain, there are antioxidants. Blueberries are one of the highest antioxidant-rich foods that we could consume, which means those free radicals, those little tails that are running around, blueberries have one of the highest concentrations of foods that help us to calm that down and take those down. They're also really high in vitamin C. They're very high in fiber. Beets, those are beets, if they don't look like beets. Beet greens in particular are really high in a nutrient called choline. Choline is a precursor to cholesterol, which we've discussed is really important. Just a little divergence on cholesterol, which I didn't mention. I said I'd mention it now, so that's good. We'll talk about that in a bit. So beets, again, lots of fiber, lots of good starches. These beets are a starch, are a carbohydrate that aren't going to cause your blood sugar to skyrocket, right? There's lots of vitamins, minerals, and nutrients in there to help deal with all of that. Celery, again, lots of fiber, lots of vitamin K. Celery is also really good if you're struggling with some digestive distress from some dysregulated gut bacteria, which is often what causes digestive distress. Celery is really good, and I'm not just talking about the stalks, the leaves and stuff are great too. So if you use them in soups or stews, or even on a salad, celery leaves are quite yummy. Broccoli is a superfood. Again, lots of fiber, lots and lots and lots of vitamin C, vitamin K. Again, some choline. Bone broth, chicken soup, good for the soul. I'm sure we've all heard that. We've all had chicken soup when we're feeling sick. Chicken soup is really good for your gut. It's really high in glycine and proline, two very important amino acids. It helps us to, remember how I spoke about the glutamate and the GABA in the brain? It helps us to formulate and balance that out. Tastes good, it makes us feel good. Lots and lots of collagen. Collagen is what all your connective tissue is made out of, and we can never get enough of that, especially as we're getting older. We tend to break down collagen a lot quicker than we can make it. So bone broth is great for that too. Egg yolks, right? This is where I'm going to give you the cholesterol talk. Egg yolks are really high in, depending on where you get your chickens from, but they can be really high in omega-3s, really high in choline, again, that precursor to cholesterol. Now, dietary cholesterol has been shown to have very little to zero impact on your blood cholesterol. All right, that cholesterol measurement that you're getting at your doctor's is if anything, very mildly impacted by the foods that you're eating, as long as you're eating naturally occurring fats. So man-made hydrogenated, like weird man-made saturated fats, not good for your cholesterol. Naturally occurring saturated fats, naturally occurring cholesterol-rich foods, like those found in egg yolks, are very, very important for your health. Remember I said the brain needs cholesterol. 25% of our body's cholesterol is used by our brain. Egg yolks are a fantastic source of that. Now, eggs are one of those things that tend to be a little bit less pricey than trying to source the highest quality animal proteins. So I would say, if you are going to splurge, get the best quality eggs that you can. Has anybody ever had like farm fresh eggs from chickens who have run around where those yolks are nice and almost dark orange? Right? Aren't those the yummiest things ever? Like, they taste different from the stuff that you get in the grocery store. And the reason is all the nutrition. Nutrition tastes good. It's all the nutrients that are in those eggs. So as much as you can, if you're going to be eating eggs, get the best quality eggs. Get those ones with those dark yellow yolks, because you'll get the most bang for your buck out of them. Really important. Coconut oil. Coconut oil is the saturated fat that was often told to us is bad for us. Coconut oil is anti-inflammatory. It helps to calm things down. It contains linoleic acid and capricolic acid, both of which are really, really good for cell functioning in our entire bodies. Coconut oil is also a really good source of something called a medium-chain triglyceride. And when it comes to brain fuel and when it comes to ketone production, medium-chain triglycerides are the gold standard. They are the thing that, they are the type of fat that the body loves the best. And a medium-chain triglyceride isn't a saturated or an unsaturated or a monounsaturated fat. It's the length of the fat itself, and these tend to be the highest in coconut oil. So coconut oil really good for energy production and for ketone production. Dark chocolate, so I'm not taking away all your treats. And when I talk about dark chocolate, I'm not talking about Hershey's Kisses. See you dancing in the back there. I'm talking about some high quality dark chocolate. Again, really, really rich in antioxidants. Really good in fiber. There's a lot of fiber in a high quality dark chocolate. Really good for your gut bacteria. I'm talking 70% or higher here. So look at your ingredients. And again, in an ideal world, the ingredients that I would want on your dark chocolate bar are cocoa butter or cocoa mass, maybe a little bit of sugar, and that's it, right? Cocoa butter, sugar, right? Sometimes they'll put in some lecithin or some soy lecithin to stabilize it out. You'll notice that the lower the quality of cocoa, the more ingredients, the more stable it needs to be. And you can't eat as much dark chocolate as you can milk chocolate. I don't know if anybody's ever noticed, but it's much more difficult to sit down to a full slab of Lindt 85% than it is to sit down to a full slab of Cadbury's Dairy Milk. And the reason is the sugar. Remember how the sugar and the cravings and the anorexigenic, so this is all coming back to the beginning. So a little bit of dark chocolate, or a lot, is a good thing. Dark leafy greens. One of the best things that you could ever add to your diet is a variety of dark leafy greens. Lots of vitamin K, lots of fiber, lots of vitamin C. Very, very, very high in antioxidants. Eat them cooked, eat them raw, eat them frozen, add them to every single meal that you can. And I'm not talking just spinach. You've got to think beyond spinach. Think kale, think chard, think arugula, think even romaine lettuce, not iceberg lettuce, let's go to a darker one, romaine lettuce. Anything that's dark and leafy, curly or flat, they're all good for you, and they're all a little different. Extra virgin olive oil, you thought I'd never mention that. We know that it's good for the heart, right? It's good for everything. Monounsaturated fats, lots of polyphenols, lots of plant nutrients in there. Very, very high in antioxidants again. We want to get as many antioxidants in the body as possible. We're always going to be producing those agents. We're always going to be producing those free radicals. Yes, we can produce a little less, but we're still always going to be producing them. So we need to eat as many foods as possible to counteract their effects. Rosemary. Rosemary oil is really good, again, antioxidant, anti-inflammatory. Just sprinkling rosemary on your meats or using it as a herb or as a flavoring, again, really, really helpful. Walnuts are known to be one of the nuts that are probably the best for your brain. They look like, I don't know if anybody knows, but some of the theories of Chinese medicine, which work really well, is if you're struggling with an area of your body, eat the food that either is that area or looks like that area. And one of the things that they've been talking about for thousands of years is walnuts for brain health. And because they look like the brain. And guess what? They were right. Walnuts are one of the best nuts that you could consume for your brain. Wild caught salmon, okay? I'm not talking about the farmed stuff, I'm talking about the wild caught Alaska, like the sockeye, the good stuff. Full of omega-3s, right? That's where you're getting huge amounts of these really wonderful omega-3s, which again we know are so good for the anti-inflammatory properties and the developmental properties of the brain. Turmeric. Curcumin is the most powerful anti-inflammatory that we can consume. And turmeric is a great place to get it, so add turmeric to your foods. Even adding a curcumin or a turmeric supplement is unbelievably important if you're looking for some anti-inflammatory properties. Fermented foods, so like your sauerkraut, your naturally fermented, which means raw, unpasteurized, sauerkraut, kimchi, your kefirs, kombucha even. Again, good to support the health of your gut bacteria, which in turn speak to your brain. So really good from that perspective. Mushrooms. Mushrooms are, again, powerful anti-inflammatories, powerful antioxidants. And last but not least, red meat. And if you are, and there's many reasons for people not to eat red meat, but red meat is a great source of naturally occurring saturated fat. It is a great source of choline and cholesterol. It is a great source of vitamin A, vitamin D, vitamin E, vitamin K2. Now, I will say that, again, the devil is in the details. Get the best quality red meat that you can. Because cows that are not healthy